This is Duke University.
This panel centers around organizations or jobs that help you harness entrepreneurial spirit. In essence, if you're going to go work for a big company or a larger company, what types of skills, positions, companies should you look for and positions should you work in order to gain the knowledge and the experience you need to go and start your own company? So we have 3 people who have actually done that. And what we'll go ahead and do is start off, I'll just have them introduce themselves and tell their story. And we'll go from there. So all right, we'll start with this.
Okay. My name is Peggy McShane, and thank you for the opportunity to have this opportunity to tell you my story to you today. I am the business owner of Net New Growth. I started this business 2.5 years ago. And the services we provide are around professional services, so it's marketing, business development, and outreach exclusively in health IT. I had a 13-year career with Booz Allen Hamilton where I did have my entrepreneurship opportunity. And prior to that, I was 10 years in hospitals, primarily in middle management and director positions. So my entrepreneurship story at Booz Allen was really started around 2000 when the partners of Booz Allen decided that they wanted to look closely at the health market. And it was very complex, seemed like a lot of challenges there, and ripe for consulting. So there was a decision made by the partnership to go into an investment, and they tapped me as the person to help operationalize that because of my subject matter expertise. At the time, I didn't have a business degree, but I had a lot of passion around the subject. So I helped with the partners and a few others in doing market research, but immediately dove into finding quick wins, quick opportunities to start the business. There were pockets of healthcare around the organization, but it was really bringing together the governance structure and the ability to market it as an entire corporate entity, and that's what we did. Today, Booz Allen is very successful in healthcare. It is a very fast-paced business. A lot of it has to do with healthcare reform, health IT, and they're very well positioned for growth in that area.
My name is Carl Rydini. Someone would say I'm the Forrest Gump of entrepreneurship. My career started at IBM. Actually, before I graduated from college, I was at NC State in electrical engineering. I needed a job to pay my rent. So I applied at Jiffy Lube, Kmart, and IBM. And Jiffy Lube never called back. Kmart hired me and said I had to wear a tie and go through 2 days of training on the scanner to listen for the beep. And IBM called back and said, would you be willing to work for us in our manufacturing software automation? We'll pay you $13 an hour. Back in whatever that was, 90 or whatever, for a kid, $13 an hour was a lot. So I said, absolutely. I found my way over into the group that was a little skunkworks group run by a guy named Tim Cook. Back in the corner of a manufacturing center in IBM, they were designing this thing called a notebook computer. It was the first notebook computer anyone had ever done, and certainly IBM had ever done. It was done on the sly with some budget money he had scuttled away. We built the first notebook computer with a team of about 20 of us, and then it later became the ThinkPad brand. And that was a great experience as an entrepreneurship kind of skunkworks thing at IBM. Tim Cook went on to become the CEO of Apple. Bruce Claflin, the guy who created the ThinkPad brand, went on to become the CEO of 3Com. And so, and everybody I work for runs the notebook development groups for all the major guys now. So that was an interesting group. I left there to go work for a startup company in Raleigh called MedAcoustics, doing acoustical detection of coronary artery disease. Did that for about 3 years, decided I wanted to go back to school, went back to business school at MIT, and did a Master of Electrical Engineering and MBA. Went to work for Bain afterwards, and because I wanted to do the business side of things. My whole goal was to start my own business and to run my own business. I said, man, I understand the technical side of it. I understand the product development side. I wanted to go on the business side and do strategy work for Bain. That was a great experience. I got sucked over into their venture group, venture capital and private equity services group in London called Bain Lab. And one thing you'll hear a theme come up with me is what I call them clutch positions. The clutch is where the engine meets the transmission, right? And it's where a lot of friction takes place and nothing works if it doesn't work. In a lot of organizations, there's these clutch positions where between marketing and sales, or between marketing and product development, or between engineering and sales, or there's these two different pieces of the apparatus, the car, and they have to clutch together and they have to work together. And it's a hard place to be in, but it's a place that if you're an entrepreneur, you need to find yourself into a clutch position, right? Where you kind of make these two groups work together, because ultimately that perspective is what you need when you're running a small company, because in a small company, you wear lots of hats. I did that with Bain Lab for a while and decided I liked it, so I came back to Atlanta and got in the venture business. Did that for about 3 years. Left that, was going to start a business of my own, and my neighbor talked me into joining his little company, and it was a great thing. We did banking software, and so I ran all the banking software business for them. The deal I struck with the owner there is I said, look, I think like an owner, I act like an owner, I worry and stay up late at nights like an owner. I just need to be compensated like an owner where I have a piece of the equity in the company. I have experience buying and selling companies from the venture business. I have analytical stuff from the business school, and he said, that's exactly what I need. He said, and why don't you learn on my dime? It was a great deal. I mean, that if you can find a place like that where, hey, I'm not running my own show, it's his show, but he's giving me a piece of the upside and I'm learning on his dime. He says, man, if I'd had a chance to learn on someone else's dime when I was your age, it would have been the best thing that could ever happen to me. So I did that. We built that. We grew it from 100 banks to 500 banks. And then in 2006, I ran the process to sell the company. Interviewed and hired the lawyers, interviewed and hired the bankers, ran the whole process, and we sold the company. Worked for the company, bought us for about 1.5 years, and then left there, took some time off, spent with the family, and then one of the guys, he was the CFO of a company I had invested in when I was in the venture business, who I thought the world of, he thought the world of me. He had just sold his second company, and he had called me every couple of weeks with an idea of, Carl, why don't we do this? Carl, why don't we do this? And finally, we decided on something to do, and we started doing it. But our plan is we're going to do 10 companies over time. 10 is the right number, 5, 10, whatever. Well, we've got one going now, which is Margin Pro, it's another banking software company. And we got another one coming up, which is a lighting company. That should be fun. So, like I said, somewhat the Forrest Gump of entrepreneurship.
We'll go ahead with John next, and I should actually thank him. Chris Gergen was scheduled to sit on this panel, and his flight was canceled this morning. And another one of our panelists who runs his own company had one of the challenges that come with running your own company. He had a client meeting that was very important to the business, and he had to be there. So John has been gracious enough to sit on his panel. Many of you know him as a professor here, but he also has a very interesting background and experience that is also very entrepreneurial. So I'll let John.
And thank you, and nice job putting this whole thing together. So I'm glad you're all here. So I guess I'm older than the other panelists, so I have a longer story, but I'll try to keep it brief. I get this question a lot of should I go work for a startup or should I go work for a big company if my long-term goal is to be entrepreneurial? So I have a couple of anecdotes that relate to that question. But my story in a nutshell, checkered career is probably the right expression. My first job was teaching philosophy at Duke University many, many years ago. Had no thought that I would ever be in business. Changed my mind through that process, got a computer science master's degree while I was teaching, and went to work for IBM, which I did for about 13 years. I'll come back to a couple of entrepreneurial stories. I left IBM and was VP marketing and then CEO of a data networking, venture-backed data networking company, which we sold. I found a little company in Illinois called Geomagic that I was CEO of for a couple couple of years and raised a round of funding for them and brought them here. And hopefully they're going to eventually be a successful company. And then I went and joined a venture-backed company in Santa Clara called Align Technology as VP of Engineering, and which was the one truly successful venture as which we went, did an IPO in 2001, and it's a $250 million revenue company now. And along the way, I've invested in and been advisor to and board member of a number of startups, and most recently, in fact, with Adam's help, started a company last summer, and it's a medical device kind of company with a partner at UNC. So we kicked around that space. So what does my anecdotes relate to what does working at IBM have to do with success or failure in the entrepreneurial world? My entrepreneurial anecdote is in 1990, I was in the networking business primarily. We were getting our butts kicked. We were starting to get our butts kicked by a company, a little startup called Cisco System, and a few of its companies in that space. We decided we had to do something. We had a couple of great technical ideas that got crushed because they were not politically acceptable. And we constructed, small task force, constructed a plan for IBM to compete in what was at the time the multi-protocol router space. Now it's just the networking plumbing that runs the internet and some corporate networks. Constructed this out of some pieces we took from research and some stuff from Austin and some stuff we were going to do on top of that. Built this plan. It started, this would have been January 1991. It was me and my secretary, and then built a team and eventually had a $100 million budget trying to run this business. And we worked at that for 4 or 5 years. It was a complete failure. Other than, we worked hard and had some fun and did some interesting technical things. From a business standpoint, it was a complete failure. What was the value for me in working at IBM? And I have many anecdotes within IBM of new ventures, and some of them in the PC space, which as a business was a complete failure for IBM. And by failure I mean lost money over a period of decades. So when students ask me, should I work for a big company or if I want an entrepreneurial career, why don't I say absolutely not? When I was at Align, all the managers that worked for me were fairly young, really smart, but had no background in management. And I had to pay constant attention because they kept making management mistakes. One example, we had pretty high-level programmers, a lot of PhDs in physics, computer science, and math working for us. And so we paid them, the young ones got anywhere around $80,000, $90,000. People were making $150,000, $160,000 a year as programmers working for us. We had no correlation between what they were actually contributing and what they were making, which is a recipe for a dysfunctional team at any level. I had to institute a system of sort of systematically figuring out what were people actually contributing, not how old they were or what had they done in the past, but what were they doing for us now, and were we rewarding them appropriately. Another little anecdote, one of my young directors came to me, and one of his top programmers had just left, just accepted a job at Oracle and was leaving. Panic, oh, we can't lose him. But he left, and then a couple of weeks later, he wanted to come back, rejoin the team. Has anybody here ever worked for Oracle? They have a reputation as being not a friendly place to work. And I don't think he was quite prepared for that environment. So he wanted to come back to the fold with all his friends and everything. And so this young director came to me and said, well, I'd like to bring him back. Can I bring him back? And I said, Andrew, you can bring him back, but I will bet you that he will not stay long. Anyway, so no, he's completely committed. He came back, we went through all the rigmarole to bring him back, and then he left within a week. Again, he found another job. So what do you learn, at least my experience, what do you learn at a company like IBM? Wonderful management training. It's sort of the academy discipline that you get from companies like IBM, GE, etc., that you can't bring, take one little anecdote. I remember the first person I fired at IBM. This guy was not doing anything, and we thought he was stealing from us, and it took us about 4 months to fire him. At GeoMagic, I had a staff meeting one Monday morning, and I discovered we had a guy in marketing that somebody said, you know, he really messed up some presentation, and we started talking about it, and I realized the person managing marketing had no confidence in this person. The VP of sales had absolutely no confidence, and the VP of engineering had no confidence in this person. And I realized here's somebody that we were paying that wasn't contributing, in fact was negative. I sat down with this individual at the end of my staff meeting and said, you know, I'm afraid your career is over, you know, and tried to work something out. So rather than taking 4 months, it took about 15 minutes, which is something you don't learn in the academy, but it relates to how you have to manage a startup. So if you can take the lessons from an IBM, if you can take the management training and the sort of the experience of a company like that built up over decades and apply it, you can be much more effective in a startup than if you just kind of go out and try to figure everything out. So.
One thing about IBM, when I went to work at IBM, I was young. I mean, I was actually 2 years before out of undergrad, and then I worked for them for 3 years after undergrad. And I used to talk to my first line managers, and I got put in their executive research program with the manager. IBM has excellent management training, and the one thing that I remember specifically that served me incredibly well, and I see it, never be a transparent manager, right? Never, that was one of the things that, never, if an employee says they've got a problem, I gotta talk to my boss and see what he says. Basically, you've told them that I'm irrelevant. You don't need to listen to me. The guy above me is the guy who matters. And they teach you to kind of own your position and to be a manager and to actually never be a transparent manager where everything is just, you're just echoing what's above you. And I thought that's something that served me well in the entrepreneurial world. The other thing you learn both at IBM and at Bain, at IBM you get experience within a big company, and IBM is surprisingly, I mean not surprisingly, when I was there I saw those sorts of problems. And the managers I worked with, they said, look, you don't realize this is actually a really well-run company. And I was really, you can do this, you can do that. So I went to work at Bain, and I go on consulting engagements into large companies. IBM's a really well-run company. I mean, a really well-run company. I did engagement for a lot of folks else, because they one of Circuit City is one I did work for, and the dysfunctions you see within them. But this is something that you learn. In a small company, you got to be scrappy. I tell folks, you're like the North Vietnamese army, right? If you engage head on, you're going to lose, right? But you got to figure out their weaknesses and figure out how to win. Having worked inside of IBM, having been inside of all these big companies as a consultant, you kind of get, you know their tendencies and you know their weaknesses. You know they can't fire that guy in marketing. It takes them 4 months to do it. You know how long it takes them. You know the problems they have and the difficulties they have, and you can use it against them. When you compete with them, you can use, I know they can't go here. I know that, I heard on the last panel they were talking about the Samsung and the display division and the whatever, right? If I'm an entrepreneur, I know big companies have these sorts of dysfunctions. I figure out how they're organized. I say, man, it's going to take them forever for this to get up to the top. There's an opportunity for me to stick my stuff in the middle. And a lot of what Cisco did to IBM, there was notes of that. There was different groups within IBM in the networking space. So IBM was a great place to learn.
So I know John's answer to this because I've actually personally asked him this before. But so I'll ask Peggy and Carl. You both have consulting backgrounds and other backgrounds as well. Did you find one of those more relevant to your path to an entrepreneur, or more, or better prepare you for that path than the other?
You mean management consulting versus the other
Yeah,
career?
yes.
The management consulting career was definitely how I was able to launch this business. Everything I learned how to be an entrepreneur was through my experience of working at Booz Allen. Part of the core competencies there is entrepreneurship. So really capitalizing on a lot of your consulting skills that you learn at Booz Allen, as well as I learned a lot about marketing. I had great mentors and great opportunities, so really capitalizing on all of that in consulting helped me to have the confidence to launch my business.
You pick up, everywhere you go, you gotta, I pick up positive knowledge and I pick up negative knowledge. So like the negative knowledge was kind of the what not to do, right? And by being inside these companies, you could pick up the knowledge of their weaknesses and how and if I'm running a small company, here's how I'm gonna compete, here's how I'm gonna win. The other piece is the positive knowledge at Bain. Bain's generalist consulting, right? So there's not really a specialist. And now my whole life I've been a specialist, and that's partly why I went there. I wanted to learn that. And so you could get smart on something really fast, and you get really good at getting smart on a topic really fast. You also realize you don't know everything. So for me, it helped me with my background, being an engineer down to my core. It helped me realize that, okay, I don't have to get all the way deep down to the nuts and bolts. Here's how you know what you need to know to make the decisions you need to make. The other thing I really loved about Bain in their approach is its hypothesis. It's the scientific method applied to business. You develop a hypothesis, two things you always ask is, what do you have to believe for this to be true? So you come up with a statement, what are the things, and you come up with a logic tree, and then you figure out the things you can do to prove or disprove each of those points to quickly reach an answer, right? So it's hypothesis driven, it's scientific method, you get to an answer real fast. The other piece that was great was we had a partner who used to say two things. You'd have a smart analyst who came up with some great analysis, and you'll probably get this. It says, okay, that's brilliant, that's wonderful, it's a great piece of analysis. What am I going to do differently Monday morning knowing that? Right? Translate it to actions. You gotta be able to, what am I going to do differently Monday morning knowing that? Right? Because some things are interesting bits of trivia that are wonderfully true, and it's great that you've uncovered it, but it's not actionable. There's nothing I can do with that, right? And so you got to always translate it to the action, and that helps in entrepreneurship tremendously. Because you have limited resource, limited attention, limited effort, limited intelligence, limited everything, and so you got to focus on what are the things that I can prove or disprove that affects something I'm going to do differently. The last one is Bill Hayes at Bain used to always say, the essence of strategy is deciding what not to do. Anybody can sit around a room and come up with 100 wonderful things to do, right? Or 100 things we could do. The real essence of strategy is deciding I'm not going to do these things. And again, working as an entrepreneur with limited resources, limited things, you don't have any shortage of things you could do, right? So hiring a guy who's going to tell you, if you go into an interview with an entrepreneur and he says, I got all these great ideas for you, I need someone to help me. Great ideas are great, right? I always want them. But I want someone to help me say, here's the ones you can afford not to do, and here's the ones we need to focus on and do. And that's what Bill Hayes on. The essence of strategy is deciding what not to do. And I think that helped me tremendously.
Do you want to pitch in on that question? Okay. Do you want to open up to questions to the audience?
The one thing I'd like to just piggyback on though and add to my experiences, I am very uninhibited, which is very unusual in a consulting background. It's a very analytical environment, and I was kind of the odd person in the group. And while people were analyzing the market and saying we really want to do this and we want to invest in it, I was kind of the person out there running and looking for the opportunities and bringing them back and helping to collaborate internally. And it's a little bit, unusual in a consulting, large consulting firm to be that uninhibited. So if you have that skill, I encourage you to capitalize on that.
How would you advise to capitalize on
Well,
that?
being number one,
Because
politically
sometimes that can
savvy,
be-
because
yes, that's exactly what I was gonna say.
because it is, you are kind of the unusual one in the group. So I had a lot of great senior mentors, and I was already aligned where I could kind of take some of those risks. But also having the success and bringing back and being able to internally market on those successes helped to continue the funding and helped what we were calling at the time a campaign.
So would you go and build PowerPoint presentations, or would you go, one of the guys said before, the most successful thing he ever did in strategy is to make other people believe it's their idea.
I agree with that, but I'm very passionate about what I do. So I know it's just a lot of people skills, going around and telling people, wow, we were able to have this marketing call, or we were able to get published here or there. It's a lot of the network, and at the time when we started, it wasn't social networking, but it was people to people, and that kind of helped to continue the growth.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could comment on, so going into a large company, from that perspective, sometimes there's an opportunity to kind of go broad, kind of a general management rotation program type thing, or there's an opportunity, on the other hand, to go a little more focused, maybe in marketing and whatnot. And in terms of like, assuming you're going into a large company, any comment on which path would be better when your end goal is to become an entrepreneur? Be general, jack of all trades, or focus and go deep?
Marketing and management. Those are the things you can take away. That's my opinion. I mean, you can pick up technical skills, but if you want to focus on something, figure out how to understand what customers need and figure out how to manage people.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I don't think it has, one of the things I would say is the downside of at Bain, being a generalist. I mean, I went to the venture business, so we would invest in companies, and I knew, and we would always have a shortage of management talent. We always have a hole to fill. We always have somebody we needed to hire. And I knew lots of folks at Bain were really smart folks, but being a pure generalist, a lot of times in a startup company, it gets very specific what you need. I mean, I need a marketing guy for. We had for the transportation industry, right? Or a sales guy for the transportation industry, right? Generalist, the longer you're in the generalist thing, the harder it kind of is to get out of it. I think it's true at Bain. It's probably true at IBM as well if you're a real generalist.
And I would say my path is a little bit different in that I've always been a specialist. I've always been only targeted in one market. But what I learned through marketing was how to target the market. So I was able to then take more generalized skills and apply it to my business today, which is what I help my clients do, is target opportunities. So just a little different spin.
Perhaps you all can touch on what was the biggest challenge in making that transition from working with a big company to going out to a startup?
I've got a metaphor I share with people all the time. Okay, I said, IBM is a 20-ton boulder rolling down a hill, right? If you want to change its direction by 2 degrees one way or the other, it's going to take hundreds of people, and somebody's probably going to get run over in the process. Metacoustics, we had 6 employees with an idea, right? It was like a beach ball rolling down the same hill, right? Any gust of wind, anything you hit, you're off course. And so it takes different muscle groups, different skill sets to try to keep that beach ball moving down the hill, and it takes different skills to move that boulder 2 degrees, right? And what you do is as that beach ball starts to accumulate things, customers, revenues, employees, it gains mass, and it slowly becomes more and more like the boulder. And so, the biggest thing in a small company is keeping it on task, keeping it focused, figuring out here's what the customer's main pain point is, here's how we're going to sell more of X, right? And make them happier and build a loyal customer base and remain focused on that, because what'll happen is a bunch of guys with good ideas are almost the death knell of without the management to keep them. Okay, here's what we're going to keep this beat. We're going to put some rails up here for the beach ball to go down, and you can adjust course, right? But you want to do it purposefully, not let the wind blow that thing around, or else you'll burn through so much money and time and people that it's not worthwhile.
When I left IBM, I remember at NetEdge, Andy Ratcliffe, partner at Benchmark, Palo Alto's, one of the board members, and he interviewed me and he said, "We never hire anybody out of IBM or a company like IBM. Because somebody out of a company like IBM cannot succeed. Why is that? Well, so at the time I had 2 secretaries in my office and an assistant, and I mean there were people doing everything, and we spent a huge amount of money, doing nothing, and that's not what you want to do in a startup. A little bit, I think the boulder to beach ball analogy is pretty good. So. What's the biggest difference? In a startup, if you need a new roll of toilet paper in the bathroom, go get it and put it in. I mean, you got to do everything, and you have to make sure that especially if you've gotten to a reasonably senior level in a big company, and you've got all this padding around you, you have to be pretty confident that you can live without it, you can function without it, and that if something needs to be done, you're okay doing it. And people often think that they're okay doing it, but in fact, they've never had the experience, and they fail. And they end up spending way too much money getting too little done. And so, I don't know if you saw this in your venture days, but venture capitalists have a little trouble banking somebody who's right out of a big bureaucracy.
Yes. Yes.
My aha moment was really in my entrepreneurship. I met a lot of small business owners, and I kind of liked that culture. I mean, it was very scrappy. They're always marketing, and they were very passionate about what they were selling. And at the time, I'm like, I just, I really like interacting with these folks. My husband was also going through a career transition. He then took a position with the federal government. So the risk of launching a business became much less because of his career. So I started to then think, I really like, I like this small business culture, and perhaps I wanted to start my own business. So I did the research and went through the profile, and I found that I really have the profile of an entrepreneur. So I pulled that together, and when I resigned to my boss, who we're very good friends, she said to me, "Are you having a midlife crisis? What's going on?" I said, "No, I really want to do this." And she said, "The door's always open if I ever want to come back." And I said, "Okay, well, I've never looked back." So, but I credited the fact that I was exposed to so many small businesses.
This is all hitting quite close to home for me. I'm a big company guy my whole career, and I'm actually doing what you guys are describing right now. And I've asked a lot of people, while I was still with Samsung, I asked a lot of people for advice because I was thinking about this a lot. What are the characteristics that can make somebody successful in the smaller space? John, you hit on one of them, which is the roll up the sleeves. The other two, and I'm interested in your thoughts on these, the other two that keep popping up in the conversations I've had are judgment, so your ability to make decisions without numbers, which I think was mentioned before, and ability to deal with uncertainty. So your flexibility, wake up one day and something is completely different. Would you agree with those two others, and are there even more than those?
I'll take the dealing with uncertainty and judgment. I don't know how to break all these up into completely separate and distinct parts, but being able to fill in the white space, being able to build something, to create something from nothing. A lot of folks at big companies can take something and make it a little something more. And my accounting professor at MIT said, there's two ways in the world to make money. You take really big numbers and you make them a little bit bigger, or you take really small numbers and make them big numbers, right? And she said that's really the only two models. And so the big company guys will take big numbers and make them a little bit bigger, right? And that's more of a evolutionary process, tweaking the knobs and whatever. Mm-hmm. But then, so that's more of a guy coming in and flying the plane exactly right and dialing in the knobs and perfectly smooth flight, making it a little bit better. The entrepreneur one is more like kind of showing up at the airport with a bag of stuff, and you got to build a plane as you're taxiing down the runway, and you're hoping that the wings get built before you hit the end of the runway is the thing you got to love. it's more, like I said, being able to build in the white space, being able to create something where there was nothing before, is the skill that I think is important and the one I would look for if we were ever hiring somebody out of a big business. If they had built something where there was nothing before, then you say, okay, this guy or gal, they're probably a good candidate.
I would also add having unconditional confidence in yourself and having a strong network of your family also supporting your decision, because that makes those days of uncertainty a little easier. I mean, a lot of people, I talk to, they would love to start their own business, but knowing what your bank account is going to look like next month, sometimes you don't always know that. I mean, I have a bootstrapped business, so it is pretty scrappy, but on the other, there's so many rewarding things about being an entrepreneur that like I said, I never looked back.
One quick, I would ask back to one of the things he said. I would always ask guys when CEOs were interviewing for companies, and if they came from, how many people have you fired? Face to face, sat across the table, let them go. Right? How'd that go? How'd you reach that decision? Right? How many people have you hired? What mistakes did you make in hiring? Because a lot of things, the irony is the big company who takes 4 months to fire somebody, they could probably fire somebody and never feel it. The little company who can fire someone immediately or hire someone immediately, it's 1/8 of your workforce you're letting go. It's a big deal, and so a lot of the guys, it's surprising me how many folks who come interview for a CEO job, and I ask them how many times. I'm not looking for an axe man, but it's a hard thing to do. How many times have you fired somebody? How did it go? Tell me about it. And I was shocked how many times guys who are running $200 million, $300 million, they never fired anybody. They got people who do that, And you said this guy, when it comes down, he's got to let go of it. He's got to do exactly what he did after the meeting. Say this person is, as a fellow partner of mine, he said they need to go work for a competitor. That's what, we need to give this person the opportunity to go work for a competitor, because that's the best strategic decision for us. He said, we need to give somebody an opportunity. Have they ever fired somebody? Have they ever let them go? Just like he did. I mean, it's the reality of the business, and that's one of the things that was always a major black mark. If somebody risen to this level in an organization and had never done that.
Let me add just one little thing that I agree with everything my fellow panelists have said. The uncertainty thing. When you people talk about can you deal with uncertainty, you sort of think about it as an intellectual exercise. Let me ask you if you think about whether you can deal with it emotionally. How will you react when you confront this sort of slit your wrist moments at a startup? Will I be able to make payroll next week or next month? I mean, that is kind of a gut-wrenching experience. Or something changed dramatically. You're going to have to let half the people go, a third of the people go. How will you function when you have those experiences? As a friend of mine said, it's not for the faint of heart. It's easy to think about it being this, you're kind of traipsing along and it's a path to glory. But every startup goes through these gut-wrenching issues. The good ones come out of it, but somebody's got to be there, not crumbling when it looks really bleak. And that's not an intellectual exercise. That's sort of a gut check.
We'll take 2 last questions, Beth and then Tom.
Sort of building on what you were just saying, John, have any or all of the 3 of you had a moment where after making the decision to go out on your own and cutting the strings, where you said to yourself, oh crap, what have I done? And if so, how did you get yourself over that hump?
Yes. I think one of the other things we used to look for in guys we're hiring, right? Have they performed under fire, right? You don't ever know how someone's going to perform until, a friend of mine in the Army, you don't know how someone's going to perform until the bullets start flying. Have you ever seen them perform when the bullets start flying? We've had our moments, And in the venture business, so we had, I got to see a lot of those, right? And in business school, it's amazing to me how, when I was there, I graduated business school in 2000, so it's the height of the VC. Everybody wants to be a VC. I came back and I went to work for a VC firm. And before I went to work, I talked to a guy who was a fellow MIT grad who was working for a VC firm, been successful. I said, I think I want to go to the venture capital business. He said, why? Horrible. Horrible. You spend all your days with lawyers. You don't, because I had this naive thought that, okay, I like technology, I like startup companies, I like business strategy. I'll go in there and I'll invest and I'll work shoulder to shoulder with these guys and we'll do it. It's not that at all. You spend your days working with lawyers, and when your phone rings, you're an investor. And investors are always separate and apart from the management, and it needs to be that way. Right? You can't go talk to their employees. You're an investor. You got a CEO there for a reason. And you can't be meddling, right? So it's the way it is and the way it has to be. And you spend your, so when the phone rings, so we've had quite a few companies. We had one company where they were a great company running out of money, 30 some employees going to be out of money shortly after Christmas. We got a next round of investment coming in. They're all lined up. We get a call from the CEO says, we got a lady who's suing us for sexual harassment, our marketing admin. We've done a little investigation, found out that she's had long periods in her life where she's employed, unemployed. Basically, she's run this game before, and you see the email. And so my choice is, Faustian choice of, okay, if we don't make this, we can settle with her, basically pay her money and have her go away, which is wrong. Or stand my ground, fire the VP of engineering who transgressed, I guess, fire her, say this is nonsense, and then lose the next round, next round of funding go away, in which case we run out of money, I have to send a notice, because I'm a board member, to the members of the company, tell them they might not have a job in 30 days at Christmas. And because if I don't, I'm personally liable for their salaries. Okay? So what do? Right? I mean, and you make these horrible decisions where it's bad or worse, you know, all the time in the venture business, and you get kind of, and even when they succeed, it's not yours. So anyway, I had they happen every day, they happen all the time. Luckily, we had a CEO in there who was cool under fire and who could handle it, you know, and we got to do what we got to do. It sucks, but we're going to, you know, soldier on. And you see that again and again. Myself, you got to realize, the hardest thing for me is realizing when to give up and when to call something a failure. No one likes to fail, but sometimes your failures can be good things. But you know, when you're right there at the moment where the world's crumbling around you, you got to make the decision when to fold your hand and when to double down. And I can't say that no one's perfect at that. It's a hard thing, and there's no universal answer. And I've been through it several times, and I haven't always made the right decision, but there's no substitute for having gone through it, you know. So
I mean, so I've been an employee of 3 quote-unquote startups, and they've all had somewhere between a modestly successful and a really successful outcome. Every one of them, I had that moment of, holy shit, what did I get myself into, and why did I do this? So what do you do now? There is always a course of action, and you need the confidence in yourself to be able to come up with, I won't say the best, but a good course of action. You need to be able to sell it, and you need to be able to execute, and you need to focus on it. And you know, if you're the kind of person that's going to shut your office door and quiver in the corner, you probably shouldn't do this. But if you focus on what should we do and how are we going to execute, you'll get through the best you can.
So we'll go 2 more minutes, and then we'll sort of jump quickly into the keynote. We'll give everyone like a 1-minute break. Tommy, did you have a question?
So a lot of times when people talk about going to the plan to go to a big academy type firm, learn a lot, and then move out into an entrepreneurial venture, the biggest sort of cautionary tale you hear is golden handcuffs, or the inertia that gets built, and you get used to the lifestyle and the comfort, and you've got this big income from your salary, and the potential upside. It comes at such a huge risk that you're never going to get out. You're going to get sucked in. So we kind of talked about the skills you try to gain in this academy, and we talked about what happens once you've made the decision. But have you all had experience with that inertia? And how did you overcome it? How do you suggest that people who have this kind of a career trajectory before them deal with, whether it's before the fact or during the decision-making process? How do we deal with that? How do we avoid that inertia?
Don't build mass. Don't build mass until you're where you want to be. It's kind of hard to say, but Bain is ultimately different professional service firms, right? I said, in the venture business, I had some smart people I knew at Bain, really smart people who I respected a lot, but I would never hire them into the job I was looking for because I needed someone who was more specialized, and I was also not going to pay them what they had. And so, in a professional services firm, you want somebody who's got, I want you to spend every bit of your salary and get you a big old house and get you a big old car and have you a couple kids and need that paycheck, and because then you'll be there forever, right? And those there's a self-selection process to the folks who make partner are the ones who have to make partner. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, David Bell, who was a consultant with me. He bought his own company, and we talked about one of the problems with the MBA and all this stuff is he ran a business, investment banking, selling small companies. He says, time after time, the guy comes in there, he's got a high school diploma, and he's selling this company for $100 million. He's dropped out of college. So these guys had no other choice but to succeed, right? When you come out of a school like this, you get a job at Bain or Goldman Sachs, or whatever, you're being bribed not to compete, right? For lack of a better, I'm paying you to stay out of the, and it's hard to get off of that and get onto the other one. And so there is a kind of Cortez burn the boats, hope for the best kind of thing you got to do. And it's hard to do.
I agree on personal values as well as, my husband and I, we had a pretty modest lifestyle, so I didn't have a huge lifestyle to continue to feed with, a bigger salary, which I knew I would get. But I think, in the end, having your own business is certainly, financially rewarding as well. But, you'll get there, it just may not be immediate.
I guess the advice I would give comes from my personal experience. I worked for IBM for 13 years. I can't say anything bad about it. I had great jobs, worked with great people, smart people. It was a terrific experience. But I always felt I was swimming upstream. I always felt I was coming to work every day and dealing with all the friction of trying to convince other people, and we were spending all our time arguing, and it really wasn't very much fun. So from my personal experience, I would say, if you're working for a big company and you're comfortable, stay. You'll know if you need to leave. And I also tell people, from my point of view, being the CEO of a startup is the most fun you can have working. You can formulate a clear objective. Everybody's focused on the same objective, because if they're not, then you can throw them overboard. And so you have a team where everybody is working together every day to accomplish the same thing. And if it's something you've chosen, presumably you think it's something that's worthwhile, and that is fun. And if you think it's more fun to work in a big company when you're arguing with everybody about positioning and doing all this kind of stuff, stay. But if you don't enjoy it, these other things don't matter very much. You'll figure out how to pay the rent and pay your mortgage and put food on the table.
But if you paint yourself into a corner with your lifestyle where you got no choice but to keep working for that company, then you're setting yourself up for a miserable life.
Strategic error.
Great. Well, let's thank our panelists.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.